Guys, let's start today's lesson, Footprints Without Feet. Here, the story Footprint Without Feet has as its central theme the caution against misusing science and its tremendous discoveries, as doing so can transform even the most brilliant scientist into a dangerous outlaw. Here, Griffin is a scientist in a tale and he misuses his important discovery and endangers society. So, let's see the explanation parawise. So, here we start first paragraph, first passage. Here, two questions are given. How did the invisible man first become visible, and why was he wandering the street? So, let's find out the answers from the lesson. The two boys started in surprise at the first muddy imprints of a pair of bare feet. What was a barefooted man going on the steps of a house in the middle of London? And where was the man? As they gazed, a remarkable sight met their eyes. A fresh footmark appeared from nowhere. Further, footprints followed one after another, descending the steps and progressing down the street. The boys followed, fascinated, until the muddy impressions became fainter and fainter and at last disappeared altogether. The explanation of the mystery was really simple enough. The bewildered boys had been followed a scientist who had just discovered how to make the human body transparent. Griffin. The scientist had carried out experiments after experiments to prove the human body could become invisible. Finally, he swallowed certain rare drugs and his body became as transparent as a sheet of glass, though it also remained as solid as glass. So, brilliant scientist though he was, Griffin was rather a lawless person. His landlord disliked him and tried to eject him. In revenge, Griffin set fire to the house. To get away without being seen, he had to remove his clothes. Thus, it was that he became a homeless wanderer without clothes, without money, and quite invisible, until he happened to step in some mud and left footprints as he walked. So, here, muddy, that covered in full of mud, imprints is the impression or stamp on a surface. Bare is not covered, and gazed means looked at steady or in surprise. Here, fascinated means strongly attracted and interested. Fainter is barely perceptible, or bewildered means perplexed and confused or very puzzled. Eject means to leave a place. So here, two boys suddenly noticed a few muddy imprints of bare feet, and they started wondering that what was a barefoot man doing on the steps of a house in the middle of London. And they also started thinking that there was a man as he was nowhere to be seen. They suddenly saw another footmark. The man was still not visible. They started following the footprints and followed them until the footprints became invisible. They had been following a scientist who had discovered how to make the human body transparent or invisible. So it was Griffin, the scientist who had been working for a long time and to see how to make the human body invisible. And then suddenly one day, when he consumed certain drugs which made his body invisible, and though it could be felt, then Griffin was a lawless person, and that is the information about Griffin. And he had once burned down the house of the landlord who was trying to throw him out of the house. And then, as he wanted to be invisible, he had to remove his clothes and then roam around without clothes and without money, and his presence was felt after he stepped in some mud and his footprints could be seen as he walked. So let's move to the next passage. He escaped easily enough from the boys who followed his footprints in London. But his adventures were by no means over. He had chosen a bad time of the year to wander about London without clothes. It was midwinter. The air was bitterly cold and he could not do without clothes. Instead of walking about the streets, he decided to slip into the big London store for warmth. Closing time arrived, and as soon as the doors were shut, Griffin was able to give himself the pleasure of clothing and feeding himself without regard to expense. He broke open boxes and wrappers and fitted himself out with warm clothes, soon with shoes, an overcoat, and a wide brimmed hat. He became a fully dressed and invisible person in the kitchen of the restaurant, and he found cold meat and coffee. And he followed up the meal with sweets and wine taken from the grocery store. Finally, he settled down to sleep on the pile of quilts. If only Griffin had managed to wake up in good time, all might have been well. As it was, he did not wake up until the assistants were already arriving next morning. When he saw a couple of them, couple of them approaching, he panicked and began to run. They naturally gave chase. In the end, he was able to escape only by quickly taking off his newly found clothes. So once more he found himself invisible but naked in the chill January air. So bitterly means in an angry, hurt, or angry way. Expense is the cost incurred or required for something. Panicked is feel or cause to feel panic. So here he easily escaped the boys who had followed him, but he had made more adventures coming up, and now he had chosen a bad time to wander in London, and it was a very winter. It was very cold outside because that is a winter season, and going on, the air was bitterly cold, and he decided to stay inside a store for warmth. And as he went inside the store, and closing time arrived. The doors of the store were shut and nobody was there inside, and he got food to eat and wore new clothes without paying for, and he became visible again as he wore shoes, overcoat, and a hat. Then he then found cold meat and coffee in the kitchen and ate them. So after he also had sweets and wine from the grocery store, then he slept on the pile of quills kept nearby and could not wake up on time. So next morning, when the assistants came and started approaching him, he became nervous and started running away. Then the assistant started chasing him as well, and then he escaped on because only because he quickly removed his new clothes. Now he again became invisible and naked too, without any money in the chill air of January. So let's move to the next passage. This time he decided to try the stock of a theoretical company in the hope of finding not only clothes but also something that would hide the empty space above his shoulders. Shivering with cold, he hurried to Drury Lane and the center of the theatre world. He soon found a suitable shop. There he made his way invisible upstairs and came out a little later wearing bandages around his forehead, dark glasses, false nose, big bushy side whiskers, and a large hat. To escape without being seen, he cautiously attacked the shopkeeper from behind, after which he robbed him of all the money he could find. So eager to get away from crowded London, he took a train to the village of Iping, and where he booked 2 rooms at the local inn. And the arrival of a stranger at an inn in winter was in any case an unusual event. A stranger of such uncommon appearance set all tongues wagging. Mrs. Hall, the landlord's wife, made every effort to be friendly, but Griffin had no desire to talk and told her, "My reason for coming to Epping is a desire for solitude. I do not wish to be disturbed in my work, beside an accident has affected my face. Satisfied that her guest was an eccentric scientist and in view of the fact that he had paid her in advance, Mrs. Hall was prepared to excuse his strange habits and irritable temper. But the stolen money did not last long, and presently Griffin had to admit that he had no more ready cash. He pretended, however, that he was expecting a check to arrive at any moment. Shortly afterwards, a curious episode occurred. Very early in the morning, a clergyman and his wife were awakened by noises in the study. Creeping downstairs, they heard the chink of money being taken from the clergyman's desk. Without making any noise and with a poker gasped, grasped firmly in his hand, the clergyman flung open the door. Surrender. So here theoretical is the theater, like where the relating to acting actors or the theaters are. Shivering means shaking slightly, uncontrollable for being a cold. Whiskers, a long projecting hair or bristles growing from the face that many mammals have. Callously means in a way that shows an insensitive and cruel disregard for others. Inn means um, a pub or typically one in the country, in some cases providing accommodation like hotel. Wagging means move or cause to move rapidly to and fro. Solitude means the situation or the state of being alone. Eccentric is unconventional and slightly strange. Curious is the strange. Clergyman is a male priest or a religious leader, especially a Christian one. Poker means a metal rod with a handle used for prodding and stirring an open fire. Grasp means seize and hold firmly. So here, this time he decided to try the clothing of the theater world, as he knew that he would surely find something there to cover his face with, and he quickly reached the particular place, the Drury Lanes, the center of the theater world, as he was shivering with cold, and he found a shop according to his needs and entered it. He came out wearing bandages around his forehead, false nose, side whiskers, and a hat. Then, as he did not have any money, he attacked a shopkeeper and robbed him for all his money. Then he felt that London was too crowded and decided to go to a small village nearby, that is Iping. He took a train and booked 2 rooms in the local inn, and the event of a stranger coming and staying at the inn in the winter night was not a normal thing to happen in the Iping, and everybody started talking about it. And then also because Griffin looked very strange. Now the landlord of the inn where Griffin stayed, Mrs. Hall, made a lot of effort to be friendly with Griffin, but he did not want to talk. And then he clearly told her that his reason for coming to Iping was for peace and quietness, and he did not wish to be disturbed in his work. And also he told her that an accident had affected his face, due to which he had to cover it. And then the landlord's wife, Mrs. Hall, accepted that her new guest was a strange scientist and was ready to excuse his temper and habits, as he had paid her in advance. Then the time came when his money was over and he had no ready cash with him for further payment at the inn, and he had to pretend that he was waiting for a check that we could arrive at any moment. Then something really strange happened, that the clergyman and his wife were awakened by some noises in their study room. When they were coming downstairs, they could hear the sound of money being taken from the clergyman's desk. And then the clergyman held a metal rod in his hand and flung the open door. As soon as he opened the door, what he said that surrender, as he thought he caught the thief. So now let's move to the new passage. Then, to his amazement, he realized that the room appeared to be empty. He and his wife looked under the desk and behind the curtains and even up the chimney. There wasn't a sign of anybody. Yet the desk had been open and the housekeeping money was missing. Extraordinary affair, the clergyman kept saying for the rest of the day. But it was not as extraordinary as the behavior of Mrs. Hall's furniture. A little later that morning, the landlord and his wife were up very early and were surprised to see the scientist's door wide open. Usually it was shut and locked. And he was furious if anyone entered his room. The opportunity seemed too good to be missed. They peeped round the door, saw nobody, and decided to investigate. The bedclothes were cold, showing that the scientist must have been up for some time. And stranger still, the clothes and bandages that he always wore were lying about the room. All of a sudden, Mrs. Hall heard a sniff close to her ear. A moment later, the hat on the bedpost leapt up and dashed itself into her face. Then the bedroom chair became alive. Springing into the air, it charged straight at her, legs foremost. As she and her husband turned away in terror, the extraordinary chair pushed them both out of the room and then appeared to slam and lock the door after them. Mrs. Hall almost fell down the stairs in hysterics. She was convinced that the room was haunted by spirits and that the stranger had somehow caused these to enter into her furniture. My poor mother used to sit in that chair, she moaned, to think it should rise up against me now. The feeling among the neighbors was that the trouble was caused by witchcraft, but witchcraft or not. When news of the burglary at the clergyman's home became known, the stranger scientist was strongly suspected of having had a hand in it. So suspicion grew even stronger when he suddenly produced some ready cash, though he had admitted not long before that he had no money. The village constable was secretly sent for. Instead of waiting for the constable, then Mrs. Hall went to the scientist who had somehow mysteriously appeared from his empty bedroom. I want to know what you have been doing to my chair upstairs, she demanded. And I want to know how it is you came out of an empty room and how you entered a locked room. So here, uh, furious means extremely angry, and peeped means look quickly or furtively something, especially through the narrow opening. Sniff means draw up air audibly through the nose to detect a smell. Leapt means jump or spring to a great height or with great force. Now, slam is shut forcefully and loudly. Hysteric means widely emotional and exaggerated reaction. Mourn means make a long, low sound expressing physical or mental suffering. Witchcraft means the practice of magic, especially we can say black magic, use of spells or anything. So here, to their surprise, they couldn't see anyone. They looked under the desk, behind the curtains, and also up the chimney, but the person was nowhere to be seen. Yet the desk has been open and the housekeeping money was gone. Then the clergyman kept on saying, extraordinary affair, the whole day because he was shocked by the incident. But the things that happened with Mrs. Hall's furniture were more fascinating. Mrs. Hall and her husband woke up very early and were surprised as the door to the guest room was open. Then, usually, his room's door remained closed and locked. He used to get very angry if anyone tried entering his room. It was an opportunity, and Mrs. Hall did not want to miss it. They decided to investigate when they saw that nobody was inside the room. His bed sheets were cold, which showed that he must have been up for a while, and also all the bandages and he used to tie around his face were lying around the room. And then suddenly Mrs. Hall heard sniffed close to her ear, and Griffin's hat that was lying on the bedpost flung towards Mrs. Hall and hit her on her face. Then the chair in the room dashed itself, hitting Mrs. Hall in her legs as they got scared, and Mrs. Hall and her husband were going out of the room when the chair closed the door, and suddenly a sound of slamming the door and locking means the door. Here, this terrorized Mrs. Hall, and she was about to fall down and then from the stairs, and he was convinced of the thought that there was a spirit in her hotel's room and that the stranger had caused this to happen. She then mourned that her mother used to sit in that chair and which hit her leg, and thought that how could it rise up against her. And the neighbors of Mrs. Hall thought that it was witchcraft which had caused such a thing to happen. When the news of the this at the clergyman's house reached to other people in the town, then everyone started suspecting the strange scientist. Suspicion grew stronger on him when he produced ready cash for his payment at the inn, and even though he had told some time back that he did not have money and was waiting for a check to arrive, then the village constable was called for, and Mrs. Hall did not want to wait for him. And then she went straight to Griffin as she had appeared from the empty bedroom at the inn. And she asked him what he had been doing upstairs to their chairs and furnitures. And she also asked him how did he come out of the empty bedroom or enter the locked bedroom. So let's move to the next passage. The scientist was always quick tempered. Now he became furious. You don't understand who or what I am, he shouted. Very well, I will show you. Suddenly he threw off bandages, whiskers, spectacles, and even nose. It took him only a minute to do this. The horrified people in the bar found themselves staring at the headless man. Mr. Jeffers, the constable, now arrived and was quite surprised to find that he had to arrest a man without a head. But Jeffers was not easily prevented from doing his duty. If a magistrate's warrant ordered a person's arrest, then that person had to be arrested, with or without head. There followed a remarkable scene as the policeman tried to get hold of a man who was becoming more and more invisible, and he threw off one garment after another. Finally, a shirt flew into the air, and the constable found himself struggling with someone he could not see at all. Some people tried to help him but found themselves hit by blows and that seemed to come from nowhere. In the end, Jaffer was knocked unconscious as he made a last attempt to hold on to the unseen scientist. There were nervous, excited cries of the hold him like that, all are shouting. But this was easier said than done. Griffin had shaken himself free, and no one knew where to lay hands on him. So here, horrified means terror, extremely shocked. Prevented is keep happening, and magistrate is a civil officer who administer the law, especially one who conduct a court with that deal with minor offenses or for the more serious ones. Knocked means collide with or giving them a hard blow. So here the scientists became really angry and started shouting that they don't understand who or what he was and decided to show them the truth. He removed his bandages and whiskers and spectacles and also his nose. It took him just a minute to do this all. And the people in the bar were getting horrified and they looked at the headless man. Then Mr. Jaffers, the constable of the village, was surprised as he saw that he had to arrest a man without head. So, but Jaffers still wanted to do his duty as he knew that the magistrate wanted him to arrest the person, that it did not matter that he had a head or not. As we all know that Griffin is now he's become headless person as he threw away more and more of his clothes, and he became more and more invisible. And finally, after Griffin removed his shirt, he was nowhere to be seen. That Jeffers was struggling to arrest a man who had become completely invisible. Then people who tried helping Jafar were also struggling as they were hit by blows from nowhere. And as Jafar made his last attempt to catch hold of the invisible man, he was knocked unconscious by the invisible man. Now everybody was shouting, hold him repeatedly, but Griffin had set himself free from them, and nobody could understand how to catch him, that invisible person. And it was written by H.G. Well. So, this is the lesson. The explanation is over. I hope you guys understand it, and it may be helpful for you all. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe my channel. Bye.